We often hear from older generations like Boomers and Gen X that Gen Z doesn't want to work anymore, or that we're simply lazy. From their perspective, it's easy to understand why. The beliefs they developed about work, loyalty, and career progression largely paid off for them. They worked hard, advanced in their careers, bought homes, and built wealth. But what if Gen Z isn't lazy at all? What if millions of young people are simply responding rationally to an economy with fundamentally different incentives than the ones previous generations entered? That's what we're going to explore. Let's start with the most obvious reason. The reward for work just isn't what it used to be. You graduate from college, land a decent job, and start doing everything you've always been told to do. You show up on time, work hard, save what you can, and avoid unnecessary spending, because you're trying to build a future. A couple of years go by. Then you start looking at houses. You realize they're much more expensive than you expected. Rent keeps increasing. Groceries cost more every time you shop. Insurance goes up. Even though you're earning more than you did a few years ago, it really doesn't feel like you're getting ahead. At some point, you're naturally going to ask yourself a simple question. Is this really the best path available? And that's a completely rational question to ask. For a long time, the traditional promise was simple. Work hard, stay patient, and over time your quality of life would improve. For many young people today, that promise feels far less certain. It isn't that people suddenly became less willing to work. It's that the return on that work doesn't feel as predictable as it once did. When the reward for something gets smaller, people naturally start looking for a better alternative. But rising costs of living aren't the biggest reason this is happening. After all, people have lived through difficult economic times before. The bigger change is that the incentive structure itself has changed. Think about it this way. Imagine your employer announced tomorrow that everyone's salary was being cut by 20%. Most people wouldn't just shrug and accept it. They'd update their resume, start looking at job postings, or see what other opportunities were available. Not because they suddenly became lazy, because the incentive changed. Now, zoom out. That's essentially what's happened over the past couple of decades. The traditional path hasn't disappeared, but for many people, the payoff relative to the effort has declined. So, people are doing exactly what we'd expect rational people to do. They're looking for a better deal. If you offered someone two different paths to the same destination, most people would choose the one that gives them a better outcome with less risk. Work is no different. For decades, the traditional career path was usually the best deal available. Stay loyal to one company, work your way up, and over time, you'd probably be rewarded for it. Today, that's often no longer true. Loyalty is no longer rewarded the way it once was. Staying with the same company for decades used to come with benefits like traditional pensions, predictable promotions, and long-term job security. Today, those rewards are far less common, making it much easier to justify looking elsewhere. Pensions are very rare. It's harder to get promoted, and when you do, the raise isn't even enough to keep up with inflation. And companies are incentivized to do mass layoffs because it makes their stock price go up. Changing jobs every few years frequently leads to larger pay increases than staying with the same employer. Starting a business has become more accessible than ever before. Some people build careers entirely online. Others work remotely for companies hundreds or even thousands of miles away. People still want financial security. They still want meaningful work. They still want to build successful lives. They're just no longer convinced that the traditional path is the most effective way to get there. And once people begin questioning the old path, they're naturally going to start looking for alternatives. And that's only possible because of something previous generations never had. One quick question before we continue. Do you think Gen Z is actually different from previous generations, or would previous generations behave the same way if they entered today's economy? I'm interested to hear your thoughts in the comments. For the first time in history, people have unlimited access to information. The internet changed one thing. People could suddenly see opportunities they never knew existed. Imagine you're 23 years old. You open your phone and see someone your age making a living as a software developer, working remotely, a freelancer, a YouTuber, an online business owner, or even someone building multiple streams of income through investing in side businesses. Will most people actually choose one of those paths? Probably not, let's be honest. But that's not the point. The point is that people now know those options exist. Previous generations were much more likely to follow the traditional career path because, for many people, it was the only path they ever saw. Traditional employers have been able to capitalize on keeping people trapped in ignorance. If they never find out there's another option, they will never try to improve their situation. Today, a young person can spend 10 minutes online and discover hundreds of different ways to build a career. Some will fail. Some were never realistic to begin with, but some are very real. And once people realize there are multiple paths to the same destination, they're naturally going to start comparing them. The traditional career path is no longer competing against unemployment. It's competing against every other option people can see. But even that's not enough to explain why attitudes changed so quickly. The biggest change wasn't just economic, it was psychological. For generations, there was an unwritten agreement between workers and society. If you worked hard, stayed out of trouble, got an education, and did everything you were supposed to do, eventually you'd be awarded with a stable and comfortable life. That belief shaped the way people approached work. It gave people confidence that today's sacrifices would eventually pay off. For many young people today, that belief has weakened, not because they're unwilling to work, but because they've watched people do everything right and still struggle with housing, debt, or financial insecurity. Whether that perception is completely accurate or not almost doesn't matter, because people make decisions based on what they believe to be true. Once enough people stop believing that the traditional path reliably leads to the traditional rewards, their behavior starts to change. And that's exactly what we've been seeing. But this is where it gets interesting. If this were only a Gen Z issue, we'd expect it to stop there. But it doesn't. If this were simply a problem with Gen Z, we'd expect these attitudes to disappear as people got older. Instead, we're seeing many of the same trends across the workforce. Millennials change jobs more than previous generations. Remote work isn't just popular with young workers. Side businesses have become increasingly common. People of all ages are looking for greater flexibility, more control over their time, and better opportunities than the traditional career path has offered. Even companies have started adapting. Many employers now advertise remote work, flexible schedules, and stronger work-life balance because they know that's what workers value. The labor market didn't change because one generation suddenly became lazy. It changed because millions of people began responding to a new set of incentives. And when enough people make the same rational decision, the belief itself starts to change. That's why I don't think this is really a story about Gen Z. I think it's the beginning of a much larger shift in how people think about work. When millions of rational people start making the same decision, it's usually because the incentives changed, not because the people did. The real question isn't why Gen Z doesn't want to work. It's whether our economic system can adapt before even more people decide the traditional path isn't worth it anymore.